Now, I don't want to bore you with historical theology here, but there are three basic assumptions on when people should Sabbath. You could probably guess when they are. There's the Friday-Saturday opinion. This is called the seventh-day view, or Sabbatarianism. Want to learn a big, important word this morning? Sabbatarianism. Can you say Sabbatarianism? Very good. That's the only time you'll probably ever have to say that or know it. Sabbatarianists believe that the command is very simple. It says we should work the first 6 days and rest on the seventh day, which according to the Old Testament starts when? Friday at dusk. These people note that the Sabbath command is one of the 10 commandments, deserves the serious treatment that the other commands do as well. Those are the Friday, Saturday people. Then there are the Sunday people. This position is called the Christian Sabbath view, or the semi-Sabbatarianist view. This position argues that the idea of a 24-hour Sabbath is important, but that day should be on Sunday, not on Friday, Saturday. Because in the very early days after the founding of the church, the Christian day of worship was moved from Saturday to Sunday to commemorate Jesus' resurrection, which took place when? Sunday morning. So it seemed like a good idea for many to start the week with the day of worship instead of finishing the week with the day of worship. Then there are the whenever you want people. This is called by some the fulfillment view. According to the fulfillment view, Jesus came to earth and by his life and sacrifice freed us from the requirements of the law. Just as we are no longer required to kill people who don't keep the Sabbath, we are not required to keep the Sabbath as a 24-hour time period on Friday and Saturday or Sunday. Now, if we want, it might even be a great thing. But the point of the Sabbath law is to expose our need for rest, recreation, and worship. So as long as we're living lives rested in God, we're living by the purpose of the Sabbath. Those are the three opinions of when we should celebrate the Sabbath. As you have probably guessed, I'm a what guy? I'm a fulfillment guy. I have to be. My work doesn't really allow weekends off. I try to find rest and worship whenever and wherever I can, but what I will say is that getting the day right isn't nearly as important as being intentional about what you're doing. The important thing isn't getting the day right. The important thing is doing whatever you do to God. The Bible says this. Paul writes to the Romans, he says this, one person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. The one who observes the day observes it in honor of the Lord. So in other words, the important thing isn't really when you eat, when you worship, when you celebrate the Sabbath. The important thing is that you're intentional about what you do and that whatever you do it unto the Lord. That's why Eric Liddell is such an inspiration to me. I mean, I think he's reading his Bible badly. I would have run. I would have really embarrassed my country. But I would have run. But I'm glad he didn't, because he had his convictions, and I'm not going to judge him. His life is an inspiration to me not to keep the Sabbath on Sunday. That's not the lesson. His life is a lesson to me on keeping the Sabbath according to the requirements of my conscience, no matter what the cost. So are you and I committed to rest and worship no matter what the cost? That's when we should keep the Sabbath, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or whenever, which brings us to the final question. Remember the final question? How should we Sabbath? What should we do on the Sabbath? What qualifies as appropriate Sabbath activity? Like I said, Jews had a very long list of things that they could or could not do on the Sabbath. Even the Old Testament has rules about what we should and should not be done. What qualifies as work? In fact, I had a friend in high school. She was an Orthodox Jew. Her name was Shira. We called her Shira, the Princess of Power. She loved that. She was actually a very phenomenal vocalist, and she and I were both in our high school production of Fiddler on the Roof. I'm sure you heard about it. We got a write-up in the local Jewish community paper. Did you see that? Okay, just go look, Google it. Shira's problem, though, was that her religion, and especially her father, prohibited public performances like this on the Sabbath. So she was going to have to miss the Friday night and Saturday afternoon matinee performances of Fiddler on the Roof. Maybe you've already caught the irony of a Jewish girl being prohibited from performing in a musical about the breakdown of Jewish tradition, which is what Fiddler on the Roof is all about. You know that? You know the musical? Tradition. Do I need to sing more? I'm not seeing it yet. When I learned how to dance like this, we brought in a choreographer who told me that it's like flossing your brain through your ears. Floss, everyone do it. Floss your brain through your ears right now. Just picture the floss, right? I see 4 people doing it. We are not going on. Everybody, through the ears, okay. Anyway, that's what Fiddler on the Roof is all about. It's all about tradition. As it was at the last minute, the entire cast and director were like, what are we going to do? We don't have understudies. It's high school. But at the last minute, Shira's father let her perform. We all cheered his tragic moral compromise. Shira was free to do what she wanted while her dad wept at home at the way modernity was corrupting his family's ancient faith, which is so ironic given what the movie is all about. Irony aside, though, what can't we do on the Sabbath? Act in plays? Run, drive, cook? What's disallowed? That's the question that usually gets asked about the Sabbath. I actually want to ask a different question, though. Not the question, what can't we do? What's the other question I want to answer? What should we do? What has God given us to do on the Sabbath? What is the Sabbath for? Not what is the Sabbath not for, but what is the Sabbath for? Again, I'm no Sabbath expert, but in my mind, the Sabbath is for 3 activities primarily. On the Sabbath, God gives us 3 things to do that are just hard to fit into very busy work weeks unless we schedule time to do it. First of all, the Sabbath is a time for rest. This is what Exodus says. In 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them. And what did he do on the 7th day? He rested. And to be clear, it's not just a time for you to rest while everybody else works. Exodus says this too. God says, on it you shall do no work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant or your livestock. Give them a break, people. Or the sojourner who is within your gates. So don't go tell the wife to go cook dinner while you take a nap. Why is my wife the only one laughing there? Don't go sending the boys out to the harvest, to the field, while you rest on your duff watching the game. Take a family nap. Give the livestock a nap too. And the servants. Take a family nap with the servants and the livestock. You know how a lot of times you walk away from church feeling like I or the preacher has just given you big, heavy, impossibly difficult things to do. You know, like go martyr yourself for Jesus Christ today. How about this one? Want to be a good Christian? Go take a nap. Seriously. After the sermon. I mean, this is from the 4th commandment, all right? This is a pastoral command. Go grab lunch after church at a drive-thru, probably not Chick-fil-A. Go home, eat it leisurely, then go crash by the will of God. Or no heckling from spouses this morning, please. Or, you didn't let me even get to my next point. Or, if that doesn't sound very restful, actually it doesn't sound very restful to me, do something that is restful for you. Some of the most Sabbath restful things in life are actually pretty active. I read about one family who they only had one rule on the Sabbath, and it was do something that gives you joy. Go enjoy God's creation one way or another. God worked really hard to give it to us. Go enjoy it. It's a command. We don't do a good job enjoying creation. For the past 6 months, for example, I've been working really hard in my backyard. I've been installing a half-court basketball court. I've told some of you about it. It's been a lot of work. On the first day, I removed trees. On the second day, I cleared the brush. On the third day, I saved up lots of money for asphalt, which is very expensive. On the fourth day, I assembled and installed the basketball post. On the fifth day, I had the lines painted, three-point line out here. On the sixth day, I installed outdoor lights so we could play at night. Finally, it got done. And what was my instinct? On to the garage. I finished the basketball project so I could go start another project. For 6 days, Matt built a basketball court. And on the seventh day, he moved on to the garage. Eventually, he died of exhaustion. That's what this is going to do to me, to us. I'm going to have a heart attack. My kids are going to have a basketball court, but they're not actually going to have a dad. Maybe they can call it the Matthew Randall Herndon Memorial Basketball Court. I mean, that's what we could print. That's what I'll probably have printed on my tombstone. You know, you have something printed on your tombstone. Mine will say, "He worked hard for 6 days." So when my kids ask me, "Hey, can we go play basketball?" what have I bound myself to say? Yes, it's the law. It's a Sabbath command moment. And that's what it means to me. Go play. That's rest for me. Maybe not for you. But what's rest for you? Hiking in the woods, hanging out with friends, reading a novel, having sex, watching a movie, going to the art museum, playing video games. What's restful? By the will of our Father in heaven, who wants us to be joyful, go do it. The Sabbath is for rest. Secondly, the Sabbath is for celebration. It's our chance to celebrate who we are as God's children. In the book of Deuteronomy, there's actually a parallel version of the Ten Commandments. And you get a little detail in there that's not in the Exodus version. Does that make sense? Okay. And in the book of Deuteronomy, here's how the fourth commandment reads. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. And here's what you shall do. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. So aside from rest, this was what the Israelites were to do on the Sabbath. They were to gather together and celebrate their freedom from slavery. If they didn't do this, if they didn't gather together to celebrate their emancipation, what would they risk happening? They would risk forgetting. So this was their worship assignment. Get together regularly on the Sabbath to remember where you came from and celebrate it. It's kind of like Juneteenth. Has anybody ever heard of Juneteenth? It's a national holiday in many states. It's a state holiday recognized in most states in the nation. On June 18th, 1865, during the Civil War, word of the Emancipation Proclamation finally reached Texas. And the Emancipation Proclamation freed all the slaves, but word traveled slowly back then. And it didn't get there until June 18th. When the slaves in West Texas finally heard the word on June 18th, though, they celebrated by not going to work. And they gathered together in the streets, in homes, in churches, and threw parties. They weren't slaves. They didn't have to go to work. They were free Americans. And whether or not you know it, we are doing the same thing right now here this morning. This is our Juneteenth celebration. We are not slaves anymore. This is a big deal because sometimes I feel like such a slave. I feel so enslaved to my schedule, having to be here and there. I can feel so enslaved to my bank account, which is constantly in need of replenishing. I can feel so enslaved to my work, which needs this and this to keep going. I can feel so enslaved to my school and deadlines for papers and projects. I can feel so enslaved to my to-do list, which always needs done. I can feel so enslaved to my cell phone. Ever feel enslaved to this thing? Where is it? It's always on my hip. There it is. It buzzes, it rings. Yes, master.